I just want to thank the Bush School, Ms. Opperman, Professor Opperman, and Dr. Hudson. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Very honored and humbled to come and speak on behalf of the United States Army and share our journey and our plan with the group here today, and I solicit your feedback later on when we open it up for remarks. So I just want to get started. I've never actually been able to brief the entire Army plan in 20 minutes, but I'm going to really try hard today. Because normally it's interrupted with a ton of questions, so I appreciate the format today. It'll make it much easier on me. I've spent 19 years in the Army so far as an adjutant general officer, which essentially we manage human resources and people. So people are our business. So I've been managing people for 19 years, and this journey we've embarked on, I never thought in a million years I would see it. And sure enough, last year when the Secretary of Defense made the decision to open up the Army and all the services for women across, multiple career fields that were closed, it was amazing to watch. So the journey has been unique and great, and I'm glad that it didn't happen until at least I was able to see it. So I was not retired. I was actually able to witness it and serve. So I just want to give you some context. The Army is the largest service across all the services. We have over 1 million people in the Army right now, 1 million soldiers across the active and reserve component. So it's a very large organization to handle. Position-wise, in context, about 200,000 plus positions were closed to women across both components. So that was a lot of positions to prepare to open. So the Army chose a very methodical process to deliberately look at everything, screen it, and make decisions at the right time to open positions. So we wanted to get it right, and we wanted to be correct, and we wanted to make sure we set this program up for success and for the future. So we have a couple guiding principles. The first order principles that we used to go through this journey essentially focus on readiness, because readiness and mission accomplishment is the #1 priority for the military and all the services. So readiness was being able to maintain readiness was our #1 principle. The second was a deliberate process. So like I said, it took 5 years to review everything and get to a decision point to open over 200,000 positions across the force, to include special operations positions as well. Scientifically based and legally defensible. So we took a scientific approach. There were some other services, they will remain unnamed right now, that took a different approach. But the Army took a scientific approach and looked at the standard for each task, for each occupation. And they looked at each of those occupations and validated a standard with soldiers that were currently in those career fields. And once they validated that standard, they put in through a battery of tests over 3 years just to make sure that they got the standard correct, and they implemented gender-neutral standards across the Army. Now, this was mandated by Congress in the National Defense Authorization Act, that we would have gender-neutral standards for all of our occupations. And then, of course, we would have to request the opening through Congress. So every time the Army goes forward and wants to open an occupation over the past 5 years, we have to notify Congress. Now, before, that took a long time. It took 90 consecutive days with both the House and Senate in session. The NDAA last year made it really simple for us. They said 30 calendar days and you're good to go services. So that made us opening those final occupations within infantry and armor extremely easy and extremely fast. So we really appreciate it. Representative Flores, you guys really made it much easier on the Army and the services to move forward. Legally defensible. As we make decisions, we have to make sure we stay within the confines of the law. As most of you may know, the Army and the services are bound that when we house folks in basic combat training, when they start training and they contract in, they're housed separately, but they train together. They're only housed separately. And a lot of that stemmed from what happened at Aberdeen Proving Ground many, many years ago. So they're housed separately, but all of our training is conducted together. Little different, the Marine Corps does not conduct all their basic combat training together yet, but I know that that is the direction they are moving in. So, and then second, we have to have female cadre at each of the basic combat training places where there are women. So when women are training, there has to be a female drill instructor available, and she has to be able to go into the facility, talk to females if need be. It's a safe and secure environment. And like I said, that kind of stemmed all the way back from when the Aberdeen Proving Ground scandal occurred. So everything legally defensible, those are the legal rules that we're bound by. Standards-based. And the Secretary of Air Force beat up standards before. Some of these occupations are extremely grueling. Their physical requirements are extremely difficult. Their mental requirements are extremely difficult. So we wanted to stay standards-based, which helps credit women when they do get through. Because now no one can say, well, women didn't make the standard. They go through multiple gates to get through, get trained, and they're awarded their occupations. So that provides the credibility that they're looking for in an Army that's about 84% men still. Leadership and accountability. Now, these are the most important aspects of making this program successful. Holding leaders accountable for the positions that they're in. It's leadership that drives all of this because soldiers watch their leaders. Soldiers mimic their leaders. So leadership is the foundation of making this whole program successful. When they look at those command teams, it's very important that they are holding up with the Army values, they're doing everything legally, and they're doing everything in accordance with the Army policies. Second, accountability. Part of why things break down so often is because people don't hold other people accountable. So when you don't, it's like when you're a parent. If you don't hold your child accountable for their actions, they're going to continue to repeat the same mistake over and over. Same concept with leaders and guiding their organizations. That's your family. And the more you hold them accountable and the more other people see that they're being held accountable, they're less inclined to make the same mistakes. So leadership and accountability are extremely important. So that was one of the biggest guiding principles as we went through this entire process. Quotas. And I'm almost done with the first order principles, but quotas, the Army doesn't put a quota out there. We do have goals. And the biggest rise we've seen here lately is that for a time period at the academy at West Point, they were only admitting about 15% women. So that number was capped at about 15%. This past year, they rose over 20%. I think they hit about 22% for the class coming in. And then the cohort that the Army put out for female officers in FY16 reached 17%. So we've risen a couple percentage points already over the past few years, and we've seen an increase in all of the combat arms over the past couple years. And a lot of that is going to stem from the fact that, we now have opened infantry and armor. So we expect those numbers to increase. So one of the initiatives that we're looking at is how do we get more women to apply to West Point and actually attend West Point? Because ROTC is not capped at anything. We have 3 commissioning sources that provide our officers right now, and that's the Academy, ROTC, and OCS. 2 of them are not capped at all. I'm sure General Ramirez would not turn any woman away that walked in the door because it's a much different process. So we're looking definitely at West Point to be one of the marks where we would see increased female presence. And then equitable treatment. And this is a tough one because what we've found in a lot of our studies is that men are afraid to hold women accountable to the same standard. They would feel more comfortable with a woman correcting another woman than correcting the female themselves. So it's one of the things that we are trying to conduct during our leadership and education training plans is that you have to treat everyone equitable. You can't just correct your males. You can't rip out parts of the regulation that deal with women only and think that you're never going to have to deal with it. You have to treat all your soldiers the same, and that's a big part of what's in our education plan right now. Now, I want to quickly go over the background before we get into the Army strategy, but like I said, for 5 years, we have been working on this plan. We were mandated by the Secretary of Defense back in 2010 to conduct a Women in the Services review. Upon that, when they finished the review with the SecDef, the Army then did a cyclical review in 2011. And after they were done, the decision was made to remove what's called a collocation rule. So this allows women to serve directly with ground forces in combat. So they removed that part of the rule, so now women could serve in those types of units on the ground. And those were the units that are directly engaged in combat. The second thing they did was they looked at the direct ground combat, sorry, it's a lot to say, direct ground combat and definition assignment rule. Now this is the rule that's put in place that doesn't allow women to be assigned to certain units. So in 2013, the Secretary of Defense rescinded the direct ground combat and assignment rule and asked that all of the services provide an implementation plan and integrate their services by 1 January of 2016, which we have definitely passed. And as you guys know, that in December of 2015, the final decision was made to open all occupations. So the Army, we had to have our decision in by September of 2015. We went forward in September 15, and we did not recommend any exceptions to policy. The Army was on board with opening all of our occupations. Now, the Army did not give the guidance on Special Forces. Special Operations Command did, but Special Operations Command also recommended opening all of their occupations and positions, to include the illustrious Ranger Regiment, which has never seen a woman to date, but we do have 3 women that are getting ready to attend Ranger Regiment training at right after Thanksgiving break. So we should see some changes here very, very soon. So over the course of those 4 years, we incrementally opened combat arms. The first was the last occupation we had in combat engineers. So the engineers in 2015 were fully opened. It was a combat engineer. It's the one occupation that's closely associated to an 11 Bravo, which is an infantryman. Later that year, we opened the remainder of field artillery. General Ramirez is very familiar with it. Cannon artillery. Women were already field artillery officers, but we had some enlisted occupations that weren't open yet. So we opened up cannon artillery, which has the hardest strength requirements in all the Army, hands down. And then we opened up the other occupation, which is tied to their systems to manage fire support. Well, and then after that, we had a lot of steps involved in this process. After that, there was the big decision to send women to Ranger School. So along the same time of opening up 12 Bravo and 13 Bravo, there was an announcement made to send women to Ranger School. So in April of 2015, we sent our first batch of women to Ranger School. Now, over 400 women expressed interest. About 109 went to the actual training down at Fort Benning, a training course to get through. It's a pre-Ranger training course. And then 19 women attended the Ranger course, and 3 eventually graduated from it. So that's that was the Ranger School was that preeminent school that if you could pass this course, you should be able to be in the infantry. And I think that mark really sent messages across the Army at large that women, yes, they can do it. If they can get through Ranger School, they can do it. We're still working on Special Forces, but we're getting there. So can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, I'll do it. So the Army strategy. Our program is known as Soldier 2020. So we're looking at this entire aspect as Soldier 2020. Whoa, I'm like falling off my high heel here. Soldier 2020 is the Army's campaign to integrate the Army and to look at readiness and to make sure that we're maximizing talent. So we looked at 5 major lines of effort. You'll see our mission there is that we get everything in place by 1 April of 2016. So 1 April of 2016 was the date we could open recruiting for enlisted women and female officers. As of 1 April of 2016, we've already assessed and transferred over 200 women into infantry armor and fire support specialists. There was 1 field artillery position or occupation left. So we've actually had a lot of success in doing this. And we chose 5 lines of effort to do that in. So we're going to focus on where you see the column for ways. Those are the 5 major lines of effort that the Army is focusing on right now to make sure that we conduct all of this and put it in place and make this successful. So the first is to transform accessions. Now, when women are assessed into officer branches, they weren't assessed into the infantry and armor like men are. They're still not. And that's because contractually, when they signed up for the Army, infantry and armor weren't open. So in FY17, the women that were assessed into the Army for officers didn't have to select infantry and armor. They weren't forced in. We call it forced branching. So right now it's voluntary for female officers to select into infantry and armor. Now, we expect that in FY18 or 19, that will absolutely be eliminated and everyone will be assessed into the Army the same way. And like I said, that really ties back to when they contracted into the military in the first place. They contracted in not knowing that they would ever go infantry or armor. The other big thing we're working on to transform accessions is we have a huge issue with injuries and non-deployable soldiers. So when we look at the physical aspect of what the Army does to you, we're moving forward with just making sure that we put tools in place to better screen applicants in. And one of those is a physical assessment test called the OPAT, Occupational Physical Assessment Test. The cadets take it and the soldiers take it. And it's an aptitude test to tell you where you physically stand so that if you get to basic combat training, it's a good indicator of whether you'll pass or fail the high physical demands required and whether you may be susceptible to injury. So by putting that test in place, and it's expected to fully get implemented in January of 2017, once it's approved officially by the Secretary of the Army, we will move forward and have a better screening to help physically take care of soldiers. Now, women are impacted more by injuries than men are, at 2 to 3 times the rate in basic combat training. So this tool will help us not only better take care of all of our soldiers, but to definitely better take care of the women that are getting injured at 2 to 3 times the rate in training. So those are the screening tools we're looking at. For talent management, the big thing that the Army did a little differently was we actually looked at all the talent we had in the force. So for the women that commissioned in FY16, the Army went back and said, hey, if you would like to go infantry and armor, submit a request. So these women had already received their branches. They submitted their requests, and the Army ended up taking 23 women and transferring them into infantry and armor right away. And a lot of those women are in training right now, and 10 of them recently graduated infantry officer basic. So very, very successful already. The other thing the Army did was they put a message out to the operational force to get at and harness the talent in the force already. So women from across the force could branch transfer into the Army. Now, we had about 23 women apply to change from a branch they'd already been trained for back into infantry and armor. 21 of those packets were accepted, and a lot of those women, like I said, they're all in training right now, and we expect that they'll hit their units sometime this summer. So the program is going extremely well. And then for enlisted women, they offered the same thing for non-commissioned officers. We've had very little success, but the Sergeant Major of the Army is on a huge recruiting initiative right now. And he has a group that goes out and speaks to all of the operational force, post by post by post, and tells them about the opportunities to reclass into an occupation as a secondary MOS, so that if they don't like what they're doing, they can go back and they're not sacrificing their career to help the Army with an initiative. So the Army definitely did a lot of planning up front to make sure that we looked at all the talent, and we're still looking at those initiatives right now, so we're not done. But now we're naturally and normally assessing folks. And then on the enlisted side, it's called a unit fill plan and the Leaders First strategy. So we wanted to put officers in place because we wanted to set conditions in the units for success by putting the right leaders there in the first place, because there is a risk of isolating women in units where there's all men in that environment. So that's what the Leaders First strategy gets at. It makes sure that there's leadership in place first, and then we put enlisted women in to follow. The first group of women are going to train in the Combat Arms at the infantry school in February of 2017. The seats are maxed out, and we continue to get growth in our numbers every single week. We manage this every week by the number, and our number increases every single week. So there's definitely an interest in this country to get women into the Combat Arms because they sign up more and more every single week. So a lot of success. Education and communicating. You see a lot of it in the news. That's a communication plan. For education, there is a robust education plan that occurs with all of the institutional and operational force right now. So every school there's an education plan. They talk about Soldier 2020 and integrating women and the professional ethic and maintaining leadership and accountability. The same thing's done on the operational force. The 2 brigade combat teams that are integrating right now, that are at Fort Hood, right here in Texas, and the other ones at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, have received robust education plans and preparation on how to move forward with the integration. And a lot of what they used was the gender integration study it's actually on the public domain, and it talks about the complications and risks of integrating into all male units. So if you ever want to read up on the study that was done over the past 2 or 3 years, the gender integration study is a great read. And then finally, assessments. And this is where I definitely want to work with the folks in the room. We have a lot of studies going on right now focused on the Army at large, and we have about 15 or 20 that are just focused on gender integration. So I definitely look forward to engaging Dr. Hudson and other members in here to see if we can work closer with the Army and the Army Research Institute to look at the statistics and see how we can do things better. The way ahead, like I said, we're continuing this. We're continuing these programs. We're continuing to recruit and recruiting initiatives right now. Like I said, having those male champions out in the field, like General Ramirez and the senior leaders in the Army, certainly helps. So as we move forward, like I said, it's going really well, and I expect good things to come, especially as we integrate all through F-17. You'll see the numbers grow, over the course of the next year. So, subject to your questions.